Howdy, everyone. Welcome to Dangerous Thoughts on Unsafe Space. I'm Carter Laren. This is a show we do every Wednesday night at 5 p.m. Pacific, which, as I learned today, is 1 a.m. In the UK. Sorry about that, people in the UK. On this show, we try and fortify Enlightenment ideas and the ideas responsible for building Western civilization through kind of straightforward philosophy talk, basically. Starting with some Aristotle, A is A, using reason as our primary means of survival. That's what we do. Kind of blue collar philosophy. We don't really like to contemplate our navel, stare at the ceiling, and wonder if it exists, like so many PhDs. We are streaming on YouTube, Utreon, Odyssey, DLive, and possibly, let me go check. Possibly we're streaming on Rumble. Although, I don't know. I'm looking at the Rumble page and it says it's waiting for the stream, so who the hell knows? But we're trying on Rumble because people have complaints. Today is going to be a little bit. It's going to be a little bit of a different show. It's going to be more relaxed. I am going to sip sake during the show to make sure that it's more relaxed. I'll do that now. And what we're going to do is we're going to have a discussion with a community member whom I'll introduce in a minute about atheism versus agnosticism. This is someone who was in on our Discord server and said, "Hey, let's talk about this." If you're a Christian or any other religion, and you don't think you can get a lot out of a conversation about atheism versus agnosticism, just pretend that we're talking about atheism with respect to Zeus, and then maybe it can be an interesting conversation. Before we start, though, just have a couple of reminders. I assume you're all subscribed. If you're not subscribed, go double check. Even if you are, go double check. If you're not, please go press that subscribe button. I was going to play the Kamala Harris clip again, but I'm not set up to do it. Maybe Beverly can do it, but I think she would agree that it's time to like, share, and subscribe, and that time is every day.
It is time for us to do what we have been doing, and that time is every day. Every day it is time for us to agree.
I agree. We should subscribe. You can also support us directly by going to unsafespace.com. You can donate. You can buy merch. You get your name in the credits. You get access to the Discord server where you can argue with me about how atheism is stupid. And you get a cool grenade mug like the one over my shoulder here if you subscribe at some level that I don't forget. I forget the name of it. Apostate, maybe, level and above. All right. So I think we have all of that stuff out of the way. All the intros. I see people are in chat. Excellent. Gene Ellis says 2 cups of sake and I'm under the table, even a Japanese one. Wow, this is a Japanese sake. So here we go, Gene. So I'd like to introduce Matt. Matt is a member of the Unsafe Space community. And bring him on. There he is. Hey, Matt.
Hey, guys. Hey, Carter.
I apologize that it's 1 a.m. your time, man. That sucks.
I don't think there's anything you can do about changing how the time system works around the world. So,
well, we could have pre-recorded. We could have pre-recorded for you, but we didn't.
Let's do a race.
Matt, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think you're an agnostic, and you did not like. I made some comment about agnosticism or whatever because I'm an atheist, and you took a little bit of issue, and you said, "Well, okay, well, I want to argue." Basically, I'm paraphrasing. Is that correct?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it was a relatively offhand comment where you said those agnostics, they don't have much intellectual rigor going on there, and
yeah. That sounds like something I would say. Yeah. Mostly I was talking about Beverly. But sure, all agnostics, we can throw them in there. Okay, so let's Gene Ellis says discuss, don't argue. I'm not really into arguing because actually what I want is the truth to win here, not like I don't really care if at the end of this conversation I say, "Oh, you're right, I'm an agnostic." Okay. I don't care. So let's just dive in. I think before we dive in, though, we should talk about what these terms mean. because I'm not actually even sure that everyone would agree on what they mean, even me. So actually, let me pull this up. I should have told Beverly I wanted to do this. And actually, I don't even know if this even works right now. Hold on. No, is that a black screen? It is a black screen. Well, I'll just read it. You guys will have to trust me that I'm reading from the Oxford English Dictionary and not making this up. The OED says atheism is disbelief in or denial of, which is weird because those are two slightly different things, the existence of a god. Also, disregard of duty to God, godlessness. I'm going to ignore the second part because if you don't believe in the God, I guess you would naturally disregard duty to a God. And it says agnosticism or an agnostic is a person. I had to look up agnostic because agnosticism said something to the effect of what an agnostic believes. So we have to go to the word agnostic, which is a person who believes that nothing is known or can be known of immaterial things, especially of the existence or nature of God, which is distinguished from an atheist. So, Matt, how do those definitions sit with you?
I have them right in front of me, so I thought I'd better have them right on hand. I've done obviously a little bit of thinking about this beforehand and scooting around on the internet. I found some definitions from the American Atheist Society, and they were a little bit more woolly. I mean, to me, it seemed like they were mixing the two terms. I mean, atheistic, A, not having, theism of God. You know, it's pretty clear in my mind that the terms shouldn't really be synonymous. I mean, you can be uncertain or unknowing. That fits the bill with agnosticism. But atheism is the denial of the existence of God or gods. And I think that's where the conversation can become meaningful, because there is a sharp deviation there. Whereas if you accept a kind of woolly definition of atheism, then it's pretty hard to draw any differences between the two because they're not specific enough. And I know you like words and concepts to be very specific. So my point comes from atheism being the denial of the existence of a creator or a god or the above, and agnosticism just, it's a broad church. It could be, as you say, not very well thought out, or it could be quite a systematic set of values relating to not having factual evidence about a creator or not.
Okay, so let's I hope this all doesn't fall apart when I say what I mean by atheism. When I think, and maybe this is a convenient atheist thing to do, I don't know. When I think of atheism, I do think often in terms of what you just said, like atheism, and I think of it like not being a theist, which means a non-belief in a deity. And we can get into, I guess there's a couple ways we could get into this, but maybe let's start with some epistemology, because I think I think a lot of this gets mixed up with what knowledge means and what it means to know something, and like there's like an epistemological framework, and if we come at it with different epistemological frameworks, we're going to end up, I think, with different categorizations of like whether someone is an atheist or an agnostic. So, and just to be my position clear, I think most agnostics are actually atheists who are afraid to say it. That's what my position is. It's not that there aren't any agnostics, it's that most are atheists, and they're just afraid to admit it. But this may be a definitional thing. So let's talk about epistemology for a second. And let's just see if we can agree on some basic stuff. Do you agree that there's a let's say someone makes a claim about reality, right? That claim can either be true or not true. And there might be subcategories to what those mean, but like true and not true is the entirety of the options available.
Yep, agreed.
Okay. I would say, and by the way, I need you to interrupt me and say like, no, this I don't agree at this part. So I would say that in the not true category, there are something that's demonstrably false, but also arbitrary assertions. So if I make an arbitrary assertion right now that, for example, there's an alien on the dark side of the moon playing Led Zeppelin and eating Pop-Tarts, it's arbitrary. There's no evidence for it. It's mathematically possible, obviously, right? It's possible in the sense of mathematics, but it's not. There's no evidence for it. We would dismiss it. I assume we would dismiss it as an arbitrary assertion, and we would dismiss it out of hand, and we would say that's not true.
Unless you want it to be a nice story, then yeah, agreed.
Okay, so and then there are demonstrably false things where I might say there are 6 fingers on my right hand, and like that you can disprove. Like, no, that's demonstrably false. Like, I can get evidence that contradicts that statement very clearly. And so I do not count atheism. I don't say that I'm an atheist because I have a whole bunch of evidence specifically that would contradict the existence of God. Although I could go there if we want to have that discussion. But it's enough for me to say, well, it's an arbitrary assertion, and I dismiss it out of hand. And where arbitrary assertions to me enter into the realm of fuzzy between true and not true. So let's say that there's also this category of I don't know, which is the entirety of knowledge is of a statement is either the status of it could be true or not true. But of course, we could decide we don't know where that line is, right? For any particular statement, I could say, well, I'm not sure, right? Which is kind of that agnosticism with respect to that statement. Like, I don't know. There's some uncertainty there. If you said, is the stock market going to go up or down tomorrow? Well, it's going to do or stay the same. It's going to do one of those things, but I'm uncertain about which one. So like that's a normal thing, right? And for that statement, for me, for those kind of statements, an arbitrary assertion rises to the level of uncertainty when there's enough evidence for it that it, like, there's some evidence. There has to be some evidence, but it's not quite enough to push it over. And we might all have even a different line where that gets pushed over, but there's not quite enough evidence for that to get pushed over into the category where I would say that's certain. Now, maybe if I was a master stock manipulator, I might be able to say, I am sure that this particular stock will go up tomorrow, right? And count that as knowledge. Or that it will go down, and maybe because maybe I have insider trading knowledge or whatever, and I feel very confident about it. But in general, the stock example is like I don't know, but if enough evidence accumulates, and normally enough evidence has to accumulate on a statement for me to decide it's in that category of what lands there for you. What's wrong about that? What's right about that? What do you disagree with, agree with there?
Apart from the example of the stock market, because that can be fiddled and it's a complex system, so it's got more than 3 variables. I wouldn't bet much on the stock market.
You might if you were a Rothschild, though.
Yeah, for sure. But I wouldn't consider it knowledge. The argument that underpins that is sensible, and it's very much along the lines of how I would construct, my separation of the 2 ideals of agnosticism versus atheism. Definitely, because I very definitely would take the initial definition of atheism from the LED, the disbelief in like categorical statement, and at that point you're making an assertion without any evidence at all, because there can't be any evidence. No one can prove that there is God or that there isn't a God. So for me, atheism sits in the exact same category as those who have religious belief. It's perfectly acceptable to go there. There is value in that, and there's certainly plenty to discuss, but it's not a provable thing.
So let me back up, because I think I don't understand something.
Okay.
In the categorization, or in the epistemological model that I just gave, are you saying that the definition of atheism that's working in your brain, or what you're thinking of atheism as, falls under the demonstrably false, like I have 6 fingers thing? Like it's like an atheist is claiming, I know this isn't true, or an atheist is claiming it's an arbitrary assertion?
The arbitrary assertion, yeah, it's not demonstrably false at all.
Okay,
there is
so I would agree with that. I would I would agree with that to a point. I think once we define God, which is a separate issue, you could certainly define gods which are demonstrably false if you wanted to. That's a separate issue. But let's set that aside for a moment. In general, we're saying, okay, there's an arbitrary assertion here. Because it's an arbitrary assertion, an atheist like me would say, well, there's not enough evidence for it to enter into this unknown category, so I dismiss it out of hand, similar to the guy eating Pop-Tarts on the dark side of the moon, and therefore I'm an atheist. Are you arguing that that's not the right definition of atheist, or that characterization of the available knowledge is wrong?
I would say the characterization of the available knowledge is wrong. I mean, as an example, there's not enough evidence. Okay, so if we go back to the times when the wisest minds on the planet Earth assumed that the sun revolved around the Earth, there was no evidence to the contrary. I mean, we can say clearly now that there was plenty of evidence to the contrary if you have the mental framework, and if you have the measurement acumen and technological base to prove it. You know, there are any number of tests that can be done, but if you don't have the framework, you just look at it and go, well, there is no evidence there. And it may be we are literally staring at the evidence that we would need to show that there is or there is not a God, that we're living in a mechanistic universe, or we are living in a universe that was created by a prime mover. I mean, without getting into the weeds on.
Well, how's that different from evidence that may or may not exist about a guy eating Pop-Tarts on the dark side of the moon? Like, how is the existence of a God in a different category?
I guess to me, it comes down to is there available evidence? And there could be. I mean, you look at the Big Bang, and right there is a whole host of questions that the wisest minds of humanity have been wrestling with, and there is not one shred of evidence that would say, "Oh, that disproves the existence of God."
Right, but the existence of God doesn't need to be disproved, right? Because we've put it in this category of it's an arbitrary assertion, so it gets treated as false, just like the guy on the moon. It gets treated as false because it's an arbitrary assertion. It doesn't get treated as disproved, but it's false. It's considered not believed because it's arbitrary, unless there is some preponderance of evidence that brings it into that suddenly starts bringing it into the realm of practically possible. Like, oh, well, maybe it could be, gee, there's all this evidence. And I'm asking you, like, what's all the evidence that would make someone say, oh, it's not just an arbitrary assertion, I should consider this a real possibility?
For example, all the material universe sprang into being in the blink of an eye from nowhere, apparently.
Well, do we know that?
I mean, it is the working hypothesis that most scientists who consider, the outer universe rather than the biology and the more specific scientific disciplines, are like, oh yeah, the universe is 13.8 billion years old, and it all happened here. And I mean, they're getting to a level of specificity where they're talking about, oh, in the first few moments, and I've heard scientists refer to that time span in terms of days, hours, months. When you're at that level of specificity, and there is still no basic cause that you can relate to, there's a massive disconnect in the available information that says quite strongly there is something very large in our knowledge base of observable facts that we are missing, and therefore we should look at a suite of so therefore there should be a suite of options that you can use to generate a working hypothesis. And I mean, this isn't a religious idea, because for me this argument isn't about any of the extant religions as they present in the world today. That's a moot point as far as I'm concerned. It's to do with what can be proven, what is observable, which is why I personally consider myself an agnostic. If the existence of God was proven tomorrow, I wouldn't go praise be or any of the other epithets used by those who do have religion. So there's a prime mover. It doesn't necessarily therefore seem to me that then needs to be believed in.
So can I ask you a question? Because I want to understand where there's a jump being made, and I'm not sure I'm following it. And maybe this is maybe I've already had too much sake. I would agree that clearly there's a lot of things that we don't know, and that will always be true about science, right? There's lots of things we don't. I mean, you can look at the origin of the universe. You can just start to go down at the subatomic particle level, and things fall apart, and we don't understand and know things. So there's lots of ways that we can expand our knowledge base to the point where we say, well, crap, there's a whole bunch of unknowns here. And as a rational person who's, an engineer, not a scientist, but device physics, studied physics, and I understand this. And I would not argue with an argument that said, well, and by the way, I'm not sure about I don't know all of the astrophysics about Big Bang and all that. So I'm just going to accept that that's all accepted science right now. It doesn't matter, but let's accept that that's all completely agreed and quote proven, or what the theory's got evidence for it. So let's assume that there's this conclusion that there was a Big Bang, and that everything happened, at this one moment, things sprang up suddenly, right? The scientific next question would be, well, or the assumption would be, well, there must be a cause, right? Because we know from every piece of observable reality that effects have causes. That's like basic Aristotle, right? So there must be a cause, right? And that I would not disagree with. But when someone says, well, that cause must be a God, what you're saying is, to me, maybe we need to start getting into the definition of God, but what you're saying at that point is that cause must be supernatural. It must be outside the realm of the natural world, because that's what belief and mysticism and that's what that means. Otherwise, if the cause is within the natural world, it's completely science, and there's no God necessary for this. So to say that there must be a cause and we don't know it, and maybe someday we will, and maybe we never will, is different than saying that cause must therefore be mystical.
I think, therefore, a definition of God should be agreed upon, because in my understanding, and feel free to pick holes in this, but the gods can be natural. I mean, we regularly, and there's a weak point to my argument here already. We refer to things as being as having great characteristics of being like gods, just because something is powerful or has a large amount of knowledge or whatever. The scientists think they are gods. There you go. Okay, there is a weak point to that.
But that's used metaphorically.
Yeah, for sure. But I mean, it's used metaphorically because it points towards characteristics that are attributed to gods. So, and I feel that the gods, or God, were they in existence, there could be a process by which they could come about. I'm minded of the Arthur C. Clarke quote: "Any technology sufficiently far advanced appears like magic." So, you know, once you explain it, you pull aside the curtain, and there you go. You can see what there goes on. And in my mind, as I've said, you know, I don't see in my conception of gods anything that would be represented by any of the religious traditions. I just see a order of being that is so far beyond our way of experiencing the universe that they come into a separate category, you know, something that can manipulate physics, time, that can create matter out of seemingly nothing. That is a god. It might be entirely natural. But so, yeah, the definitions, as ever, definitions are essential. And if we don't agree on them, then round in circles we go.
Well, so this is interesting. So if we find out, let's drop the Big Bang stuff for a moment and do something that's easier. I think like easier for people to understand, and actually more, maybe even more controversial, although I'm not sure. There are people who make a similar argument about the, you'll see why I want to do this in a moment, because it's easier to conceptualize this. There are people who make a similar argument about evolution. You hear, I mostly hear it from Christians, but maybe there's other religions that make this argument. They say, well, evolution may have occurred, but something kicked off evolution. That like the idea that there's this primordial soup and that random, you know, electrostatic energy and sunspots and whatever suddenly caused the creation of amino acids and or proteins that can replicate is ridiculous. And something caused this, and it's and you know, that's, God is the origin. God's the thing that caused. God's that cause, right? Have you heard this argument?
Yes. Yeah, okay. Certainly have. Yeah, it's the watchmaker, isn't it? You know.
Yes.
That who is behind. Yeah. Rather than
so,
the blind.
Let me ask you this. So just with in that context only, I would say, well, I'm an atheist. I don't think God caused this. There's no God. There's no evidence for a God that caused this. I'm not going to say that there was a God. I'm not going to pretend that I don't know if there was a God. There wasn't a God. It's an arbitrary assertion. Now, if later on we learn that actually aliens from Alpha Centauri came here and manipulated the primordial soup and implanted some stuff to make the DNA behave in a certain way and evolve, and then they got on their spaceship and left, I would not feel like I was wrong about being an atheist. I would say, yeah, there was a cause. It was a completely natural cause. It was another being came and did some stuff. That was the cause. There was a cause. And the reason I want to make that distinction is I think epistemologically there's something very different between saying there's a cause that I don't know, and it may turn out to be something that's kind of crazy but still real, or there is a supernatural entity, because I know you're saying that you're not talking about this in terms of any particular religion, but the truth is most of the globe is talking about this in terms of a particular religion, and they do have a conception of a God, and that God is supernatural. And when they use the word God, they mean not bound to the physical laws of the universe. They don't mean understands the physical laws of the universe better than we do, but still exists in the natural world. They mean not bound by the physical, like none of the physical laws matter. And I think, to me, a being that was in the Arthur C. Clarke conception just that much more advanced may appear magic to us, but I'm not willing to concede that it's magic unless there's evidence of magic. And I don't see evidence of magic. All I see is evidence of unknown, which is natural. Of course, there's evidence of unknown. Tell me, explain why I'm wrong in that scenario.
I don't think that you're wrong, per se. It comes down to that definitional argument, and I think you're leaning into the religious folk on this one, because by saying that their creator is outside the bounds of physics and all the rules and laws that bind the rest of the universe, it's just a MacGuffin. There isn't. You understand? You know the term
Yes.
MacGuffin. It's yeah. Okay. So it's just it's not a. There's no rigor involved in that. They just go, oh well, it's because of that. So they just sidestep rather than. I mean, if you said to a Christian or a Muslim or whatever, hey, your God exists and I can prove it, but he, she, it was also created by these natural processes, do you think those same believers would then abandon their God, or just say, no, we know now that our God exists? And if the religious people would accept a God that is naturally created, then how would that sit within your epistemological framework?
That's an interesting question, because I haven't thought of it. I can't imagine a religious person actually accepting that. And maybe we need to get into the definition of God here. Because and granted, most of my connection with religion is I was raised a fundamentalist Christian. Most of the people that I know that are religious are Christian. I maybe know a couple people who are other religions, but mostly it's Christian. And so I may be tainted by the Christian view of a God, but I don't know many Christians who, if you said, well, let's actually bring the aliens back in. Well, we now know that aliens from Alpha Centauri came down and they made a bush burn that appeared to be magic to Moses, and they did X, Y, and Z. They did all these things that are written about in the Bible, and they wrote some stuff on some stones and gave them to Moses as well. And it turns out that the God is these creatures from Alpha Centauri. I don't know a lot of Christians would. I think they would either lose their faith or rebel against that in some major way and say, no. God exists outside of these creatures. God used those creatures. There's something beyond those creatures that is the God that I worship, not those creatures.
I think there you have an understanding of some of the intellectual inertia that exists within organized religion. Organized religions aren't dynamic systems. And I don't wish to offend anyone who has a strong belief. And I understand that religions evolve and change over time, though it's only within bounds. You know, there are only there's only a certain framework by which things can move. So you're probably right. You would cause a schism of a fundamental level, even if it was factually correct, because there is a large part of religion that needs no proof, needs no evidence, and doesn't have to be internally consistent. So in that sense, the religious get a little bit of a free pass because they can, you know, just fall back on their belief. And then to incorporate that into your argument when you don't hold the tenets of their belief is starting to make me feel a little bit uncomfortable with that that part of your argument there, I think.
So I'm trying to avoid, I kind of expected you to have a conception of God that was more in line with the traditional religion, but you don't. So this is interesting because I'm not actually sure I know what you mean by saying you're agnostic, but let's just have a really simple conversation. Let's make this really easy. Let's have a conversation about Zeus. Are you agnostic with respect to Zeus?
No.
What are you with respect to Zeus? Are you worshiper Zeus? Are you atheist, or are you like what's your position on Zeus?
I've caught myself in a logic trap now. I was going to say no, that is just a dead god, a story. But no, I can't get myself out of jail free with that one. I'm agnostic, and there could well have been representations to people who existed in the times before Zeus was worshipped, that caused people to worship that entity. I mean, how close that is to our conception of Zeus today is probably quite far off. I mean,
okay, so let's go back to epistemology and we talked about before. Zeus is an arbitrary assertion. I assume you would agree with that. What's the preponderance of evidence that turns Zeus from a non-truth into a possibility, which is what is required to be agnostic about Zeus rather than atheistic about Zeus?
I guess it comes down to the frequency argument. So, I mean, it's undeniable that humans have a religious tendency. Is that religious tendency baked in? Is it a artifact of consciousness and the hierarchical structures of the universe and how we like to have a place, and how indeed many creatures like to have boundaries in which to fit? You take those creatures out of that framework and they lose their coherence, or they lose their ability to behave as they would given the usual constraints. So is that just an artifact in that sense, or is it a case that there are so many religions and there are so many gods because something keeps poking us, something keeps saying, you know, believe, respect, worship, encourage, and throws in a miracle once in a while, and then it comes back to the unknowable, because you've got subjective human experience and then you've got storytelling and myth making. So yeah, it's and that's where the agnosticism comes in, because I understand from a conceptual point of view that there comes a point where you just can't drill down to it anymore, so you have to back off and say, okay, well, it's an abstract concept, it can't be proven, so pshaw, throw it away. But it still doesn't prove the converse. So I'm
well, you don't need to
happy.
prove the converse, though, right? An atheist doesn't need to prove that Zeus didn't exist. An atheist can just say it's an arbitrary assertion. Homer's great, but you know.
Yeah, and I agree with that, but that's an arbitrary assertion with respect to Zeus, whereas for me, Zeus doesn't escape out of the whole sense of godness or the godhood or whatever. It's come from somewhere, and
okay. So your evidence, I just want to clarify, your evidence of Zeus's existence, because that's what we're talking about. Your evidence of Zeus's existence is tied in with even other religions, because you're saying, well, humanity seems to have this tendency to create, I'm using the word create not to offend people, but to create these gods and to write about these gods and to talk about these gods and to believe in these gods. And the fact that humanity does this over and over again is that itself is enough evidence to lend credibility to any one of these instances, which is common, Zeus included.
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
So this is interesting because I would argue that you don't live as an agnostic with respect to Zeus.
That's fair enough. But there are 100 other gods that I've never heard of, and yeah, I mean, he has no relevance to my life. I've not even read Homer, so I don't even get the story.
So I guess the reason I'm bringing this up is there's this idea that, okay, well, if you're not sure about Zeus, which is what agnostic means, right? You're not sure. If you're not sure about Zeus, what kind of arbitrary assertions are you sure about? Like, why are you not sure? Why are you sure that my person on the moon eating a Pop-Tart is wrong? That's not true. Or maybe you're agnostic with respect to that. Maybe I'm wrong.
No, for sure. No, the Pop-Tart on the moon. There's only one instance of that, and that was generated here and now this evening. Whereas I think there's 80 distinct flood creation stories from radically different human populations right across.
Well, sure, maybe there was a flood.
For sure, yeah.
But that's not a god, that's a flood. And
also attributing events beyond your control to gods. But then you're back into the whole, is the idea of God just a placeholder for that which is beyond your control and beyond your understanding?
It seems to be historically, but let me ask you this question. So my Pop-Tart eating dude on the moon, I don't remember his name. I don't know if I named him, but my Pop-Tart eating dude on the moon, you're saying, well, that's just one instance. You just made it up just now, which is all fair. And so you're like, well, so that doesn't count. But in 100 years or 500 years or 1,000 years, will Harry Potter count? Because damn, a lot of people talked about Harry Potter. There's a bunch of books, and then a lot of people talked about him, and there's Harry Potter fan fiction. And like, if there's some kind of apocalypse and remnants of the internet survive in a few libraries, does the Matt 1,000 years from now look back and go, well, I don't know, I'm agnostic on Harry Potter?
No, because for me that's much more about because Harry Potter didn't create the universe. You are then.
But there's still mysticism involved, right? I mean, there's still magic involved.
Yeah, for sure. But that doesn't mean that Gandalf created the world just because there's magic involved.
We're not worried about who created the world. We're worried about, like, the question is, there are things that are unexplained, and like there are things that are, someone makes a supernatural claim. This thing happened. Jesus walked on water. Harry Potter made a feather float in class, or maybe it was Hermione. I don't know. One of them made a feather float in class. Like, those are both supernatural claims. And it seems like you're agnostic on one, but the other one, you're like, that's just fiction. Also, Beverly's mad at you because Gandalf is Lord of the Rings, but that's a separate issue.
I'm very well aware where Gandalf comes from. Then she can be quiet, or I'll set the Balrog on her.
Yes. So sorry, I didn't mean to disrupt you.
No, that's fine. And it's a difficult one because it seems that we are mixing specific examples of gods from the pantheon in with the idea that there could just be a being for which no one has knowledge or evidence apart from our existence, which cannot be disproved, you know.
So your agnosticism is limited to a specific a couple times you've said something about created the universe or created the world or whatever. Your agnosticism is specifically limited to areas of scientific understanding where we still have questions.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, yeah, and all of the myths and the traditions like that. I mean, look at what they've done for humanity. The quality of the art and how it's moved people through time. It's like I can see the point in that, even if it has, even if it is just arbitrary assertions. Um, it, that in some levels didn't even concern me. Is it a good story? Great. Um,
Sure.
but when you come down to the absolute fundamentals, to me, it's in one sense, it is the prime mover issue that most interests me because, I mean, when I was young and I knew everything, um, I was a staunch atheist in the sense where God does not exist. If you
Hmm.
could reason with religious people, then they wouldn't be religious. That kind of stuff.
Hmm.
And it's only, as I've got a little bit more humility with age and maybe a little bit more wisdom, that I can appreciate a lot more the religious traditions, and that's all well and good, but they don't concern me because at my heart, I still think of myself as a rationalist, and I want there to be a reason for something. And if it turns out to be a mechanistic universe, um, kind of maybe just a little bit sad about that, but I obviously accept that. But if it turns out there is some fundamental force or something beyond our comprehension which has created the universe, then well, there you go. That's great. Glad to know that factually. And that's where my agnosticism sits, I guess.
This is interesting because maybe I'm gonna have to circle back to, 'cause I don't know if I know you answered this, but now I'm not sure that I either understood or maybe I didn't get a satisfactory answer, or maybe I did and I just didn't understand. Where's the leap come from? Because I'm back to this thing where I'm agreeing with you. Like, there may be a cause. So what? Why is that? Why is that? Why is that agnostic? Like, why is the cause supernatural? Like, when we say agnostic versus atheist, we're specifically talking about belief in a supernatural, belief in a God. We're not talking about belief in some huge alien species. We're not talking about like, hey, maybe physics is way more complex than we thought. Hey, maybe actually time travel is possible. Hey, maybe Einstein only has a fraction of the truth about the universe, and there's like massive more understanding that we could have, and like all that is on the table as far as I'm concerned. Like, sure,
Okay.
that's all possible. But when someone says they're uh, either a theist or an agnostic, they're saying either they believe in or they're not sure about a supernatural entity, a supernatural involvement, something that sits outside of anything we could possibly ever know. If we look at the definition of agnostic in the OED, it's a person who believes that nothing is known or can be known of these things. It's like it will always and forever sit outside of our knowledge. It's a outside of reality claim. It's this claim that there's a thing outside, always outside of our knowledge, which means it's not part of the natural world. And I'm having trouble making the leap from there's a cause, possibly a super complex cause that seems almost infinitely powerful compared to us, and that cause is necessarily outside of the natural world, or possibly outside of the natural world. Like, there's evidence that that cause is outside of the natural world. That's where I'm like, where's the evidence that it's outside the natural world? I'm not even sure evidence could exist that would suggest that.
Okay, so for me, I guess I've not been explaining this as
It
I
could be my fault,
conceptualized
so
it.
I'm not trying to throw it
No,
on you.
no,
Sorry
no.
about it.
There's no fault. I mean, it comes down to defining terms, and the more you define your terms, the closer you can get to finding either agreement or disagreement. And to my mind, if let's say, for example, and I don't wish to make myself a god, but I am a god, and I
Okay.
create out of nothing a universe, and that's our universe, and it rolls forward, and we get all of the complexity that comes out and from whatever. But I am fundamentally incapable of going into that universe or interacting with it, my mere presence would make the universe cease to exist. I would fit the bill of being a god, but I still could have been born of parents, or in a meta universe. So
right, but that may be true, but that's 100% speculation with zero evidence that suggests that that's the case, right? So this is where I have the problem, right? There's an arbitrary assertion. Hey, there's a cause. Okay, I agree with that. There's a cause. Great. We don't know what the cause is. We agree on that. But then we say, because we don't know what the cause is, any speculation about the cause is an arbitrary assertion. We have no evidence about what the cause. We have literally zero evidence about what that cause could be. So anything you say about it can be dismissed out of hand. It's all speculation. It's just fantasy. And you're saying, no. I have enough evidence that it must sit outside of us in some way that causes it to be a god. Or it could, not that it must, but that it could.
Yeah.
And you have evidence such that it could.
No, I have no evidence, obviously. But something created the universe. It must have done. We're here.
I'll say something caused the creation of the universe. I don't want to imply that it was necessarily a sentient being or anything, but there was a cause, sure.
Yeah. Agreed. I just feel, whilst it might not fit your definition, and maybe indeed not even mine, if 99% of people would agree that would fit the category of a god, then that is in some ways acceptable to me. I'm agnostic about it. I don't know.
So there's an arbitrary assertion. I want to walk through this. There's an arbitrary assertion, and we agree that some evidence needs to accumulate for that to flip into a maybe, right? It starts as a dismiss out of hand, and some evidence needs to accumulate for that dismissal out of hand to become a maybe. And then if there's enough evidence, then it becomes yes, right? But like, we're not getting there. We're just like, can it get to a maybe? And what's the evidence that it's a maybe? Like, where's any evidence that it's something that would be defined a god that sits outside, that's supernatural? And what could such evidence look like other than people think it?
Yeah, true. The number of contingent facts that we have literally no evidence for, and when I say we, I'm talking about the sum of human knowledge. Back again to the Big Bang, the scientists are like, oh well, yeah, we can talk about 5 minutes in, but you get beyond that, and they're talking about an infinitesimal point. Like, okay, so there are sets of rules about which, and I understand that you're going to say that can be purely mechanistic, but in my mind, that is enough data points of lack of knowledge or lack of conceptual framework that will allow for the possibility. So it goes beyond just an arbitrary assertion into kind of, these are going to be tied either to a soulless and mechanistic universe, or the potential that there is something maybe with sentience behind the whole creation.
All right, wait, I'm still having trouble. I'm asking for evidence that suggests that it's supernatural, and I'm hearing the evidence is that there's not evidence. The evidence is that we don't know a bunch of stuff. But that's not evidence. That's a lack of information. That's not evidence.
Okay, so back to my point earlier about just because we can't we can't understand what we see as no evidence, that there's plenty out there. The universe is in some levels comprehensible. The universe in which we live anyway, to some degree, is comprehensible. There is going to be a mechanism by which we can understand, even if it was pushed by a supernatural being. From that point on, it will fit into a framework that we will be able to follow and look at. And so the fact that we can't see the evidence there, but there are still these glaring blind spots in our perceptual framework, that to me is enough of a potential.
Okay, but that's kind of equivalent to me saying, well, there's blind spots with regard to evidence with my man on the moon eating Pop-Tarts, but someday we'll have more evidence. Like, there's a lot of not knowledge there. There's lots we don't know, and someday we could know more. There could be more evidence that we obtain. So you better consider it as a possibility.
For sure, but Elon will tell us in just 2 years' time if the man is eating Pop-Tarts. So, I mean, that one will be resolved.
Sure, but right now it's not resolved.
Indeed, but there are things that we can point to right now that we go, where is the missing 95% of, it's not 95%, whatever percentage of the mass of the universe? Where is that? What is that? You know, that's
well, you recognize that's just a mathematical, like, the math works out and we're off by something. Like, why can't the answer be a very rational? Like,
it can be.
Why is it just like, we don't know? We don't know, but we don't need to then bring in speculation of supernatural as a plausible explanation. Because the moment you bring it in as a plausible explanation, it actually cuts off avenues of exploration.
Sure. I think we're going back again to the difference in our conception of supernatural. I mean,
okay.
And you just end up in, because so many of these concepts are generated by science, by myth, by religious traditions, by repetition, and we're kind of picking some of them and then trying to bring epistemological rigor to them. And there are always going to be, at the fundamental level, bits that can't be resolved. Some of our conceptual framing is going to be out. By definition, it has to be, because otherwise we'd know more. So
sure.
I think I would be happy referring to something entirely explicable by mechanistic means as a god if it was sufficiently beyond the scope and framework that we would consider the normal universe. If there is
okay, so this is interesting. So now you're taking all of the wonder that I feel about science and all the unknowns and saying all those fantastical things that could be true, I'm just going to call any one of them God. Therefore, I'm agnostic because they could be true, which is, I guess we now have to do the thing I like we've been avoiding, which is, I'm not sure. First of all, I'm not sure you represent most agnostics here, but maybe you do. I don't know. Can we define God?
No.
Okay. Actually, that's fine. If we can't define God, how can you rationally say, I'm not sure if the thing we can't define exists? I mean, talk about an arbitrary assertion. I mean, I could say glorp exists, and you could say define glorp. Yeah. And I'm like, I can't. Now you're agnostic with respect to glorp.
Yep. And I hear that because there's always going to be blind spots and weak spots unless you have a level of certainty. And yeah, I mean, I don't have that level of certainty, but in my heart, which is a foolish thing to say because what I mean is my head. I don't use God to describe anything in my life on a day-to-day basis.
So you're practicing an atheist. You live as an atheist. How would your day-to-day life be any different? So normally when someone says, I don't know the results, we can use this. You don't have to use the stock market as an example because you didn't like that one. But normally if someone doesn't know the results and they're unsure about something, they hedge their bets on it, right? If I'm sure this thing exists, I act in one way. If I'm sure it doesn't, or it's arbitrary, so I dismiss it, I act in another way. If I'm really actually unsure, I'm probably hedging my bets. In what way do you hedge your bets with respect to the supernatural entity's existence?
I do not hedge my bets. Since I found out about the idea of Pascal's wager, you know that one?
Yes.
Okay, so your belief is contingent on self-interest. Do you think something that could be described as a god would be fooled by that? I watch my daughter when she's like, "You can't see me."
Right, yeah, it's the same thing. Can you describe for people what it is? I don't know that everyone knows Pascal's wager. Why don't you just lay it out and then you have a good counter argument to it? So go ahead and add that.
Okay, so Pascal's wager is the idea that God may or may not exist. But if God does exist and you don't believe in them, then you're going to wherever the unbelievers go. Whereas if you believe in God and God doesn't exist, you've not lost anything. But that's a very transactional and very human sort of bit of philosophy. And from the very first moment I heard it, which back in the mist of time when it was a different century. Even then, I thought that's not convincing. That's no good argument for me. So I don't expect any God would be convinced by that either.
It was in last century that I first heard that as well, and I had the same reaction. I was like, why is this taken as a serious argument? What a stupid argument. If I were God, I would be like, so you believe in me because you believe in me because you're hedging your bets on it? Like, that doesn't count. Like, how would that even count? In fact, I resolved the reverse when I heard that. It actually made me feel stronger about my atheism because I thought, okay, well, if I'm wrong, I did go through a time where I was an agnostic because I wasn't really sure. Keith the Hat Guy will remember this because he knew me at that time. And I eventually became an atheist. But I remember thinking to myself, if I'm wrong and I die and go to heaven or hell, whatever, I go to the purgatory judgment time, whatever it is, in whatever version of the religion, right? And there's two options at this point in my life. I could go down the Pascal's wager path, and then I would have to say, well, I believed in you because I wasn't sure, and so I said I believed in you because I tricked you, right? Like, I know that shouldn't work. If there actually is a God, he should laugh at me and kick me to hell, because that's stupid. But it also made me think, well, actually now I could stand before a deity and say, look, I was honest. What more do you want? These are my honest convictions. I stuck to my honest convictions. It would have been dishonest to abandon my convictions just to pretend to believe something I didn't believe. I'm not a dishonest person. If you're going to condemn me for not being dishonest, so be it. But there's hundreds of potential gods, at least a few main ones I could have believed in, lots of different versions of you in particular that I could have believed in. I didn't believe in any of them, and I wasn't about to guess and pretend to believe in something that I didn't, because I'm an honest person. And if you're going to judge an honest person, you're the fucking asshole.
Yeah, 100%. I agree. And the best conception I've heard of that recently is Dr. Peterson. Repeatedly, when he's asked, does he believe in God, the answer he gives is he behaves as if God exists, which is a much finer way of living. He's not pinning himself down, but he is saying, I I live as a moral person, I live as a good person. And then
Right.
if a God does exist, then, and you didn't believe in me, but you behaved in a good way, you're going to hell. That God's an asshole.
Right. Someone's mocking me, saying that would probably turn out great, Carter. Well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, look, if we are actually ruled by a petty, angry, childish God, then I'm not really sure which one it is. So I really don't know what to like. Okay, then what if it's Zeus? Like, you guys are fucked. Like, just as much as I am. At least I read some, I read my Homer and my Aeschylus and my Sophocles and my Euripides, anyway. So, all right. So let's get back to this. So you, if I say define a God, you're like, no, I can't define God. I don't do that.
I mean, that's a bit intellectually dishonest, really. It's
okay,
and I totally understand that. If you refuse to define something, the conversation was stopped there, really, because if you're not prepared to define terms, then we can't go any further than that.
Well, but you mean something when you say God, so you could define. It doesn't have to be what Christians would say. What would you say?
Any entity that could lay claim to creating the universe, which we know, that would be a good one. Any of the gods that are, any of the religious traditions gods, if they were proved to exist, then I'd go down.
What about Xenu, the evil god from Scientology?
I'd have to say no, just because they're batshit crazy, man.
I'm not sure why, given the context of this conversation. What about pharaohs that claimed they were gods?
See, I also have a non-rational streak a mile wide. I mean, once you get to pharaohs, you're into the pyramids, and who built those bad boys?
Well, actually, we could have a whole conversation on that, because I think the pyramids are fascinating and there's a lot of really unanswered questions. I'm not quite a Daniel Jackson. I don't really think that aliens came down and built the pyramids, but really cool shit happened. And it's like they figured out some really cool stuff. And there's I could be an archaeologist in a different life.
There's a lot of the equivalent of epicycles in the archaeological circles surrounding the Egyptians, and certainly the megastructures. And you've got the archaeologists going, oh, well, I think you'll find, and it seems like they're backing themselves into corners when they can't answer simple questions like, that thing is fucking huge. We could not make it today with the technology that we have. Explain that. Well, I think you'll find if you get a big enough ramp.
Lots of slaves.
Lots of slaves. That doesn't work for me at all. So I mean, I'm well happy to go into a level of speculation on that, because there is evidence, and you could bring your gods in there. The gods could just be moving those big bits of stone.
So I would argue, I don't have enough evidence to say that anything, even aliens, happened in ancient Egypt. Like, clearly I'm not going to say supernatural things happen, because I don't think you can have evidence for that. I wouldn't even say aliens happen, because I don't have any evidence. I don't know enough at all about anything like that. And I would say that's a very implausible explanation for what could have happened. But we can use a modern thing that people like. There's a kind of common, I don't know if it's really a belief or if people are just joking about it, but in Silicon Valley, there's lots of people now who are like, well, we're living in we're living in the Matrix. This is all a computer simulation, and there's a programmer. Now, if this were a computer simulation, now, by the way, that's another claim that I dismiss out of hand arbitrarily because I don't think there's enough evidence to say that this is possible. Now, that doesn't mean it's proven impossible. I'm not claiming that it's proven to not be true. I'm saying it's dismissed out of hand because there's not enough evidence. But if somehow suddenly in front of our eyes right now, like, I don't know, a Linux prompt showed up and someone dude was like, wall, I am the god of all of you, and you're in a simulation, like, oh, okay, like I guess there could be something that would happen, and I would say, oh, there's a programmer and we're in a simulation. Would you is the programmer a god for you? Would that be a god by your definition?
Because they hold every single one of the cards. They could, if there was a programmer right at this moment, they'd push some keys, you stand up, take off your shirt, declare everlasting fealty to Xenu, and
no one wants that.
but you take my point, then you could be reprogrammed in a moment to accept anything, the fundamentals of art. And it in a lot of ways it's even pointless. Just it's a great idea as a thought thing, but if it's true, we can't change anything. It has.
A lot of people are way too impressed with that idea, as far as I'm concerned. It's the kind of idea that's great when you're high, but when you're not, it's like who cares? Like there's no.
Doesn't
it's
stop
arbitrary.
The bank repossessing your house, does it?
No, it doesn't do anything. So would you say that you're agnostic with respect to a programmer?
Yeah. And also somewhat disinterested as well. If that's what it comes down to, I'm like, seriously, that the best you can come up with was COVID and the clutch of retards that are in charge. That really is the best that you can do.
So a bad programmer.
Really bad program. Yeah, it's just not interesting. I'm still agnostic about it. I don't know, but it has very little interest in me.
Okay, so it's actually, I know that we've gone over an hour, and I don't want to keep you too much because I know it's late there, but I want to drill down on this one little piece for one more, because maybe we can make a little bit of progress on the agnostic versus atheist question. I'm saying that a programmer is an arbitrary assertion. What is the evidence that you see that you're like, oh, a programmer could be, so therefore I'm not an atheist about a programmer, I'm an agnostic about a programmer?
Just because, given my stated terms, they would fit the definition I've used as a god. Therefore,
okay, so you locked yourself into that one.
Yeah, I locked myself into it. Yeah,
but there's not the evidence. You said so. The definition of a god. I agree that the programmer would meet the definition of a god by your definition, which is fine. But where's that doesn't mean that you would be agnostic with respect to a programmer. There would still need to be some evidence that would arise that you would say, well, the claim of a programmer is not arbitrary. There is some evidence of programming, and that's why I'm agnostic, because it could be.
Yeah, and then I guess it comes down to my definition of agnosticism is I'm not going to make any strong assertions until there is some evidence. And if it turns out it's a programmer, then...
But you're dismissing my Pop-Tart dude out of hand.
I'm not.
I want to leave this conversation with agnosticism on Pop-Tart dude. That's my goal.
I ate the Pop-Tart. I'm sorry. He's gone.
All right. Fair enough. Matt, I know. Actually, Matt Deckard in chat says there is no evidence. I hope he's talking about the Pop-Tart dude, but he might be talking about simulations. I would agree, which is why I would say it's dismissed out of hand. But I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think you would say the evidence is that lots of us think that it could be true, and therefore there's something in humanity that right? To get back to your religious, like there's this recurring idea, and because it recurs a lot in humanity, that's the evidence.
That and the massive blind spots in our scientific knowledge, that there is a plausible space there in which a God can be found to be lurking behind the back of the fridge.
I'm still going to push back on that one, because that's just saying, like, because we don't know, not knowing stuff isn't evidence of a thing, anything in particular. It's just evidence of not knowing, right?
Yeah, true.
Like, I don't know if you're wearing pants right now, but that's not evidence of anything, right? I'm not agnostic. I'm like I'm not
going to stand that.
All right, Matt, is there anything else? I don't want to. We don't have to keep going. I don't want to keep you up. I know it's late where you are. Is there anything else you want to say as a slam dunk to prove everyone I'm wrong, or just make a final point about something to the audience?
No, I mean, there's a lot of circularity in the sort of discussion, and you can bang on about it forever, I think, and still no one would be entirely satisfied with it. Otherwise, this would have been resolved a couple of 100,000 years ago or whatever by the first cavemen. But
do you live as an atheist? How would you live differently if you were an atheist?
So in the UK, we have a lot lower incidence of religiosity than you do in the States. And a significant proportion of our population consider themselves to be atheists, but without much philosophical rigor going in behind that. They're just like, I don't believe in God. Though they do believe in TikTok or whatever.
Which, by the way, I do think is valid to do, but that's okay. Because my position is an arbitrary assertion. So if that's the amount of rigor someone wants to devote to it, that's fine with me. I've thought about it more because I started on the other side, but.
So no, I don't think I do live like an atheist, and in some ways I live by a lot of the moral codes generated by religious folk.
So you think if you were an atheist, you would have a different moral code?
Probably not, because there's a strong correlation between religious ethics and a-religious ethics, because
you can't get along in society if you want to rape and murder people all day long. That just doesn't
exactly.
That doesn't evolve as a strategy.
Have you read Brett Weinstein and Heather Heying's book?
I haven't.
The Hunter-Gatherer's Guide to the 21st Century. I mean, I'm not going to paraphrase or butcher, but they do make reference to how religious thought and practice can fit into an evolutionary sort of framework.
Okay.
Which is pretty interesting. They say it far better than I could. I won't butcher it, but yeah, I mean, it's that cross correlation between things that could be described as arbitrary assertions and Darwinian evolution.
Right.
So, I mean, yeah, it took them a book to dismantle some of that, so I won't try and do it now.
No, that's cool. I mean, I'm definitely people probably won't think this because I've been arguing that I'm an atheist, but I'm pretty humble with respect to human knowledge, and I'm like, look, there's just a lot we're going to get wrong. There's a lot we're not going to know. We're going to make shit up along the way. We're going to explain the river's behavior by inventing a river god. We're going to explain the sun's behavior by inventing a sun god. We're going to feel consternation and anxiety about stuff and invent gods and anything that we need to, any myth to make ourselves feel better or to control populations, which definitely happens. So yeah, I that the idea that there's some fit there is not, that doesn't sound ludicrous to me. that they're making some argument there that like, yeah, okay, there's a fit. So All right. Well, I wasn't sure what you said how you would live differently if you were an atheist. Did I miss that or no?
You didn't. How would live differently as an atheist?
Or did you sidestep that? Did you Kamala Harris us on this one? Did you just avoid that one?
You've got to keep playing that clip.
It's a great clip, Beverly. You can play it whenever you want.
No, I think by my definition, an atheist says the gods definitely do not exist, which to make that statement is a statement of faith, which I don't hold to. So
right, but what would you do day to day? How would your day to day life be different if you walked away from this conversation and said, "Oh my God, Carter's right. I have to be an atheist. None of these gods exist." How would you wake up tomorrow and change your life? What would you do? Would you eat different breakfast cereal, change your profession, get a divorce? Like, what would happen? Did you start murdering people? What would happen in your life?
Probably very little.
That's my fundamental question, but okay.
Mm-hmm.
Very little. All right. I'm sorry I said this before, but I want you to do it again because I then pulled this off on a tangent. Any last final words you want to give the audience about anything? Actually,
I hope I didn't let the Discordians of Unsafe Space down by being the first creature to appear on Dangerous Thoughts, and I hope it was as interesting for everyone watching as I found it, and I hope it was interesting to you because it's not just about getting to a point of discussion. It's finding out where the weak parts are in your epistemological framework and going and thinking about that quietly in a darkened room and seeing if that will bear fruit in future. So
I really enjoyed it, Matt. I mean, I enjoy these discussions, and I haven't defended atheism for, I want to say 15 years. Like, I just don't talk about it. So this has been fun, and I think it's interesting. It does sharpen, regardless of whether we change positions, it'll sharpen our wits, I hope, and sharpen our thinking. So I enjoyed it, and you have made me want to bring more people on who want to, more people in the community. If they want to argue about stuff, we should start doing this more often because I think it was a fun exercise. So thank you very much. Sorry, Keith the Hat Guy said praise the Lord in chat, which is funny. I know he's not religious. I don't know what he's doing. I don't know what's going on in chat, but all right. But yeah, thank you very much for joining. And this was great. So I really appreciate it.
Thanks very much for the invite. I really enjoyed it. And I'll see you in book club or something.
Yeah, get some sleep, man. It's late.
Yeah, will do. Cool. Take care. Bye now.
Thanks. You too, man. Bye. To everyone else, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a fun conversation. I enjoyed it. If you want to have these conversations, go into Discord and argue with me there, or say that you want to come on or whatever. I don't know. Do something like that. Remember, make sure you're subscribed. YouTube hates us. Susan hates us in particular, so she'll probably unsubscribe you. Make sure you are subscribed. Share if you want to expand the community so more people can argue with Matt and tell him how wrong he is. Then share videos, get people involved, get them into the Discord community, which you can do by going to unsafespace.com and just becoming a member at any level. You get into the Discord community. So I think that's it. Have a good night, everyone, and we will see you on Friday. Beverly, you can jump in and tell me, are there any shows coming up this week that I should be promoting other than Covfefe Break on Friday? Let's see if Beverly's paying attention. She's seldom actually paying attention.
She's asleep.
Yeah, she's not even here.
It is time for us to do what we have been doing, and that time is every day. Every day it is time for us to agree.
All right. Well, thank you, Kamala Harris. That clarified things. Have a good night, everyone, and take care. We'll see you Friday. Thanks for spending your time with us today. If you're new to the channel, we have a deep content library that includes discussions with everyone from James Lindsay to Brett Weinstein. So go check it out. And please consider supporting the Unsafe Space team by visiting unsafespace.com/donate. You can find us on a variety of social media platforms, and you can find a community of like-minded individuals on our Unsafe Space Discord server, which is open to financial supporters at any level. See you there.
Warning. This is an unsafe space. Dangerous ideas have been detected. The content of this production has not been authorized by the Cathedral. Pay no attention to it. Please download this updated list of contagious individuals. Use the hashtag GetBoosted to receive 2 complimentary Liberty pellets. Mass formation psychosis is just a right-wing talking point. Please purge it from memory and resume your programming. If you think about it, no one should be allowed to express opinions. But don't. Think about it, I mean. That's not your job. Thinking has been scientifically proven to be less efficient than compliance. Science, scientific, and scientifically are registered trademarks of the World Economic Forum. Unauthorized use is prohibited. Computer voice courtesy. Never mind, that last line is fake news. Please disregard it and return to your safe space immediately. There will be cake.